The president's first campaign manager is on Capitol Hill, preening for an audience of one. Corey Lewandowski in front of the House Judiciary Committee as part of its investigation into whether the president should be impeached. Lewandowski may as well have been cutting ads for what's largely believed to be an imminent run for Senate. And the president liked what he saw from Lewandowski, live tweeting his former aide's appearance. Lewandowski is a witness, though, to some of the most flagrant acts of obstruction of justice detailed in the Mueller report, including Trump's effort to enlist then Attorney General Sessions in corrupting the investigation into Russian interference. Mueller writes this in his report, quote, Trump dictated a message for Lewandowski to deliver to Sessions. The message said that Sessions should publicly announce that the investigation was, quote, very unfair to the president, that the president had done nothing wrong. And Sessions planned to meet with the special counsel and let him move forward with investigating election meddling for future elections. Lewandowski said he understood what the president wanted Sessions to do. That was all according to Lewandowski's testimony to Robert Mueller. But Lewandowski wouldn't answer questions about that or much of anything else that mattered in his testimony today. Instead, for much of the last 3 hours, he's been repeating this refrain.
Mr. Congressman, I'm trying to adhere to the White House's request. I answer questions that are provided in the Mueller report only, so I'm trying to reference that report directly about your question, Congressman. The White House has directed not disclose the substance of any discussions with the president.
Did he ever discuss with you any concerns that he may have committed a criminal offense?
The White House has directed not disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
Right,
I recognize this is not my privilege. Again, Congresswoman, I recognize that the privilege is not mine, but I've been asked by the White House to. Congressman, I'd be happy to answer your question, or you can just have a conversation by yourself. But if you'd like to ask me a question, I'll be happy to answer.
I'm going to continue. The reason is
well, then don't ask me a question if you don't want to hear my answer.
My time. This is a House judiciary, not a House party.
But Lewandowski's wasn't the only circus in town. Another one of the president's men was also on stage, albeit a very different one. The man who once stood at the press secretary's podium to speak on behalf of the United States of America, and the White House made his debut on Dancing with the Stars, because of course he did. This was Sean Spicer's turn on the reality dance contest last night. So there you have it. Two loyal aides, two very public faces of the Trump White House, two undeniable examples of forever changing our views of exactly what conduct becoming of the office now looks like. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Here with us at the table, Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico, Ron Klain, former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and an advisor now to the Biden campaign, NBC News correspondent Heidi Presbella, plus former chief spokesman for the Justice Department, Matt Miller, and Joyce Vance is here. She's a former U.S. attorney, has been monitoring the hearings all afternoon for us. If you could answer this for me. What claim to privilege? Why was Corey Lewandowski able to get away with not answering any of those questions?
It's because two things. One, the White House made a very aggressive privilege claim, and there is at least some basis in law for this privilege claim that people who haven't even served in the White House are aides. A circuit court held that, or at least alluded to it during the Clinton administration. But it's one that an administration has never made before, and it's never really been tested in practice. I think the second reason is, the Judiciary Committee hasn't really kind of held him to account. I mean, one of the things that I think the chairman could have done today is when he came in and gave this kind of obnoxious, childish performance where he's asking people, well, will you tell me if it's in the report? What's the page number? And refusing to answer questions, not just the questions where the White House has asserted privilege, but questions where there were no privilege. The chairman could have shut down the committee immediately and said, you know what, Mr. Lewandowski, either answer this question or I'm going to hold you in contempt. And the Justice Department right now might not prosecute you, but the Bill Barr will not be the Attorney General forever, and a future Justice Department you might want to reconsider answering my questions.
Do you agree with that?
I do. Look, I do think that, I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and what I can tell you is there's no such thing as a president hatchet man privilege, okay? And that was basically the privilege being asserted before the House Judiciary Committee today. The committee is going to have to decide if it's going to go down this path of holding these hearings, if it's going to break through the stone wall that Trump is building, or if it's going to let it happen. And I think, today was the first foray. They didn't do that. I think what happens next is really important. Do they go to court and get an order to compel Lewandowski to try to testify? Do they threaten to hold witnesses in contempt, as Matt suggested? Do they up the ante? having said that, though, Nicole, it is worth noting that essentially, through the Stonewall, Corey Lewandowski basically acknowledged that the President of the United States asked him to do something that was obstructing justice. That should be the headline here. That's a pretty significant revelation. Not news, but nonetheless, out of his mouth, a revelation. That's a big deal.
And who's to say that wouldn't be the headline? I mean, I think that we are so insulated in this Washington bubble. We have probably all, by 4 o'clock today, heard some of the instant feedback that he created a circus. Obviously, that was our take on it. But if that is the substantive takeaway, then does this strengthen the path to impeachment?
I think it does, or I think at least, again, kind of in some ways redoubles the pressure on the House Democrats to decide what they are doing here. Lewandowski's testimony alone states that the president asked him to do something that is quite arguably an impeachable offense, and the Mueller report has others. And so I think, today was step one, but it keeps on begging the question, well, what is step two? What is step three? What comes next?
Joyce, let me bring you in on this. I mean, Donald Trump has been found to have committed felony campaign finance crimes by the Southern District of New York. Donald Trump has been found to have committed 10 acts of criminal obstruction of justice by Robert Mueller and his investigators. And I think what Ron was just sort of pulling the curtain back on is his suspicion that that may not be the headline, that Corey Lewandowski today confirmed at least 2 of those instances of criminal obstruction of justice.
This hearing got off to a rocky start. There's no doubt about that, with Corey Lewandowski really pulling and sort of plotzing himself along with claims that he hadn't read the report and couldn't answer questions. But by the time we hit Representative Hank Johnson from Georgia, Lewandowski was answering questions, and I think Ron is right here. There's no president hatchet man privilege, and Lewandowski essentially conceded that the president asked him to communicate to Jeff Sessions that the Mueller investigation needed to be stopped in its tracks. That's not news to us, you're right, but it may be a stunning headline for millions of Americans who haven't read the report yet.
Well, listen, since you all have shamed me into having a substantive conversation about the substance of all this, let me read a little bit from the Mueller report about exactly the substance to which Lewandowski has been asked to testify today. Lewandowski wanted to pass this message to Sessions in person rather than over the phone. He did not want to meet at the Department of Justice because he did not want a public log of his visit and did not want Sessions to have an advantage over him by meeting. And what kind of men are these that they're worried about, like, who has the upper hand in a meeting about how the president obstructs justice? Jesus. On set, Lewandowski described as Sessions' turf. Lewandowski called Sessions and arranged a meeting for the following evening at Lewandowski's office, but Sessions had to cancel due to a last-minute conflict. Shortly thereafter, Lewandowski left D.C. without having had an opportunity to meet with Sessions to convey the president's message. I remember, Jake, talking to sources close to the president around this time of the president reaching out to Lewandowski to help not just with the investigation, but with personnel changes at the highest levels of the Justice Department, calling Lewandowski about switching out people running the department because he didn't like that Sessions hadn't thrown. He was enraged that Sessions had recused, and he didn't like what he was seeing from Rosenstein. He'd already fired Comey. I mean, this does seem to bring the story back, if we let it, to the central claims of what Mueller found Trump to have done, which was to obstruct justice.
You're right. He didn't answer the question how many times he spoke to the president over that period of time. Lewandowski, dodged that. But if what you're saying is true, which is that Lewandowski shone light on this fact that the president asked him to stop the investigation, why was that not the focus of every single Democrat's question at this hearing to bring that to light? If that is your takeaway, at the end of the day, Democrats are going to have to leave this hearing and say, what did we accomplish today, and did it bring us closer to X? They don't know what X is. Yeah. They don't know what they're doing. And at the end of this hearing, I suspect, because I've been texting with members and I was just up there, that they feel like Trump has changed the rules so much that he's impervious to all of this. He's not afraid of impeachment. He's not afraid of legal action because the Justice Department's going to back him up. Yeah. So they're just kind of hapless, coasting along and doing their thing. And Democrats are, by the way, according to Democrats, not according to me, playing into that. And that's what. And Pelosi has not moved a centimeter. She still does not want to impeach the president. And even more so, Jerry Nadler went on New York radio yesterday, I believe, and said, I want to impeach, and we have the information we need to impeach. Nancy Pelosi has said the exact opposite of both of those things. I mean, I've covered Congress for 10 years. I've not seen divides like this on such a big issue even in these last 10 years.
I want to press you. I want to bring you into to this part of the conversation. The word that I heard from sources today was hapless. That the Democrats. Two observations. One, that Nancy Pelosi has effectively thrown a wet rag over any smoldering flame that could have emerged from today by taking impeachment off the table, and that there was a haplessness to some of that early questioning that Joyce alluded to. What are you picking up from your sources?
I'm just remembering, Nicole, at the very beginning of all of this, the skepticism from myself and other reporters like Jake that this made-for-TV version of the Mueller report was going to work. And they said, no, this is why it's going to work, because we're going to bring these witnesses in and we're going to make them read from their sections of the report, and it will be compelling because it will be their testimony in their own words. And why is this happening, that all of these lawmakers are standing up on the dais and barking at the witnesses instead of doing exactly that, scripting this out, having the stagecraft of this, of the witnesses themselves in their own words, giving these sound bites so that these will be the headlines. Maybe you're right, that maybe this will be the headline coming out, but it's not guaranteed because it was so disjointed with all of the theatrics. And Corey came in there, he came in there for a fight, looking for a fight,
it was
and
all
to be a very
theatrical.
hostile witness.
Let me let you try to respond to that. I saw you wanted to get in.
Yeah, look, I mean, all true, but this is still a democracy, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to look at that and say, here's what happened. Someone came into a hearing today and essentially admitted that the President of the United States told him to obstruct justice, and one of America's two major political parties sat there and cheered him on like trained seals. And that's not the Democrats on the committee. That's the Republicans. And I think ultimately this is going to come down to a question of whether or not the public decides to hold them accountable for that. Yes, in the interim, the Democrats are in a box. Yes, they have to figure out this impeachment thing. Yes, they have to reconcile all of this. But the big picture here is that we're seeing a breakdown in law, in the rule of law, and legal adherence. And one of the two political parties is just clapping for that as loudly as they can. That, to me, is important.
I'm with you. I've never heard you so quiet. What do you think?
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
It's a question.
Look, I think Ron's right. I mean, I feel like sometimes we're doing a little bit of victim shaming, criticizing the Democrats when they're the ones at least trying to uphold the rule of law and trying to get at what happened here. I think there are two substantive takeaways here. One is the one Ron mentioned, the facts from the Mueller report that the President of the United States did commit a crime in office, that he obstructed justice. There's another takeaway, which is that the president is actively trying to obstruct a congressional investigation. He's ordered someone who never worked for him at the White House to go in and not answer questions about his interactions with the president. Remember, that was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, obstructing the congressional investigation. And I think that's where Jerry Nadler's going. The problem when you get to the end of this is where does it end up? And that gets back to this fundamental question. Someone asked me today, how do you grade what how the Democrats are doing? And it's impossible to give an answer because they have two different goals. Jerry Nadler wants to impeach the president. Nancy Pelosi doesn't.
Matt,
I don't know how you grade
wants
that.
to get this done, file articles of impeachment by the end of the year. How long does the court process take to take people like Corey Lewandowski to court to compel them to have to answer those questions?
That's one of the issues. It can take months and months and months. And so this scenario I raised at the beginning, where if the chairman had interrupted the hearing and said, I'm going to hold you in contempt and go to court to try to enforce this. Well, when they subpoenaed Don McGahn, they didn't go to court for over 3 months to try to enforce it. That's not really Nadler's call. He doesn't control the House counsel that goes to court. So there's a little bit of internal politics in the House that make this very difficult.
What is the what's happening behind closed doors? I mean, are people like Jerry Nadler, do they feel like the defeatism that we've all alluded to in terms of this entire endeavor? Does the blame for that lie at Nancy Pelosi's feet? And does Nancy Pelosi feel like if Trump's reelected, if there's this feeling? I mean, I think your analysis is right. The lawlessness, the debasement of these once great institutions, the presidency, the Congress, is now so normalized among Trump's voters. They don't care that Corey Lewandowski was up on Capitol Hill basically giving a middle finger to the role of congressional oversight, that Sean Spicer's boogieing in a Seinfeld shirt. I mean, it's all a joke. It's all laughable. We laugh because crying on TV is so ugly if you're a girl and you wear makeup. But, is there any exasperation with House leadership?
Yes. there is. Yes, there's a lot, to be honest with you, and you see that because half of the caucus is out in favor of impeachment. I don't think that tells the full story. I know for a fact a lot of members who have come out for impeachment have done so because it's the easy thing to do and it's demanded in their district, and they believe also that it's not the best politics for them. But Pelosi has made clear she believes the politics are bad for Democrats, and she's not, again, moved an inch off of that, and she refuses to talk about it. I mean, at her press conference last week, she was pressed about this. What are you thinking? If it's not impeachment, what should we be calling it? How should we be thinking about it? And she says, I'm done answering these questions. I'm not talking about this anymore. And that tells you all you need to know, frankly, about how she feels about this. And if what you said is true, Matt, and I accept that Lewandowski today did testify that the president did ask him to intervene here. So, like, that should be the end of it, according to what you're saying, right? I mean, if that is the truth, if he did testify to that, and I'm not a lawyer, you are, and if that is against the law, then, I mean, that would appear to be all the information Democrats would need to move toward impeachment. Instead, they're stuck in this mushy middle, and people are getting frustrated, and Nadler has a committee full of progressives, full of eager prosecutors and former lawyers who want to do this. And the question is, here's the other thing. The president's not being punished at all politically for this. Democrats are still doing business with him. They're going to fund the government. They're going to give him his money to bail out farmers in the Midwest. I mean, he's not suffering politically at all. He's still able to operate the government. Maybe he's suffering with the electorate. I don't doubt that. But in the daily machinations of government, Democrats are still doing business with him, still talking to him about USMCA, going to deliver him a huge victory on trade, talking about drug pricing. I mean, if Democrats were serious about this, they'd be doing two things. They'd go to the floor every day and offer articles of impeachment. They could do that. They'd get an immediate vote within 48 hours. And they'd also say, we're not doing business with you if you're going to keep interrupting our oversight. This is a constitutional responsibility, not a hobby. And they're doing neither. So what is the political cost for the president continuing to tell his aides not to testify?
So I have a 7-year-old, and then the only real battle I've dealt with is screen time. But I put that timer on, and I'm holding the line on screen time. And if I were to take it off, it would be obvious that I wasn't serious about monitoring screen time. So he's 7, and he's internalized that lesson. What message does it send to the president when there are no limits? When they say, oh, you broke the law, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to hold you accountable for violating the Emoluments Clause. We're going to hold you accountable for running an illegal campaign. I mean, there are never any consequences for him. And the screen time analysis holds. He watches TV all day and does whatever he wants.
Well, I am absolutely confident your 7-year-old is better behaved than the president. I'll start there, Nicole.
He has a conscience.
Yeah, but look, I come back to it. I know this sounds like, Mr. Smith or whatever, but in the end, the consequence is whether or not voters re-elect or vote him out in 2020, and that we are a democracy. And if the voters aren't willing to step up and enforce these norms, if some of the Trump voters aren't, in fact, all upset, if people aren't willing to go to the polls and make a change and demand a change, then this will be the new normal. I mean, this will be what our country will become. And whenever Trump leaves, someone else will come who will be just as bad, just as awful, maybe a Democrat, maybe a Republican. But this will be the new normal unless the voters in the end decide that this is not acceptable.
Joyce, are you optimistic watching the substance? You've all been good at pointing that out for me and for our viewers. Are you optimistic that the substance that comes out of today's hearings will be rewarding enough to sort of block out the noise about the political machinations or the circus up there around Corey Lewandowski and the president's allies? Or do you think today will serve as a disincentive from continuing with hearings like this?
Optimistic might be too strong of a word given how many times we've thought the rule of law would finally have a resurgence and it's flopped. But Democrats have two cards to play here. One they play today, one in the future. The card they play today are the new committee rules that will permit at the end of this hearing 30 minutes of questioning by House staff for Republicans, 30 minutes from the Democrats. And if the Democrats play their 30 minutes right, they've got talented former prosecutors on staff, and they will walk Lewandowski line by line into the key admissions that he made in his testimony to Mueller. And they'll ask him, you said this, is it true, yes or no? And we'll have this series of admissions. Lewandowski has tried to avoid giving Democrats sound bites. That's their chance. And then the card that they can play in the future is that Democrats have, and I think it was Matt who pointed out they were slow to go. It took them months to go to court to enforce the subpoena for Don McGahn to testify in front of them. But I think people expect that there will be a conclusion to those proceedings in court sometime before Thanksgiving. And if the courts, as expected, enforce that subpoena and force Don McGahn to go back in front of Congress and testify and answer questions, then that really means it's unnecessary to go through that same proceeding with these others. That same court ruling should hold for all of these folks, and that'll be the first domino to fall. And then Congress will have the opportunity, as you say, to enforce screen time and get some real testimony.
Because it's, at the end of the day, all about enforcing screen time.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.